Buonasera. Buonasera a tutti, grazie dell'invito e grazie di avermi dato la possibilità, invitandomi, di conversare con Nadia Murad. È per me un grandissimo onore, una grandissima emozione, ve ne accorgerete anche voi ascoltandola. Io ho qui con me gli appunti sulla vita di Nadia, le cose che lei ha detto, le cose che lei ha scritto, ma vorrei che fosse lei a parlarne, e sarà lei a parlarne. Prima di collegarci con lei, di ringraziarla per essere qui, ci tengo a dire due cose introduttive. La vita di Nadia, l'impegno di Nadia Murad si incrocia con alcuni degli eventi che più hanno cambiato la storia contemporanea, la nostra percezione della guerra, la nostra percezione della sicurezza, dell'insicurezza. Hanno riportato alla nostra memoria, alla nostra esperienza, parole come genocidio, che è esattamente quello che ha subito la comunità da cui Nadia Murad proviene, quella yazida. Chiedere a Nadia Murad di parlare del suo impegno significa chiederle ogni volta, ed è per questo che la ringraziamo in anticipo e la ringrazieremo molte volte nel corso di questa conversazione, ogni volta che una vittima di un crimine così efferato come quelli che ha subito Nadia Murad parla di quello che ha subito, rievoca un trauma che è il trauma più eccezionale, tragico, che un corpo, soprattutto che il corpo di una donna, può vivere. E perciò io la introdurrei con un grazie preventivo, perché ogni parola che lei ci regalerà stasera sarà una parola per noi, per scuotere la nostra coscienza, e per lei una parola che rievoca una ferita che decide di condividere. Quindi ringraziamola così. Benvenuta Nadia, grazie di essere con noi. Nadia Murad è un'attivista, è una donna, è quel sorriso gentile che le vedete sul volto, è un premio Nobel per la pace, premio Nobel per la pace 2018. Al suo impegno di attivista e al suo impegno come donna arriveremo, ma io vorrei ripartire con lei da lontano. E vorrei ripartire con lei da lontano, cioè da quella che è stata la sua vita quando la vita non era in tempo di guerra, ma era in tempo di pace, perché noi, soprattutto noi cronisti, noi giornalisti, la vita in tempo di pace la raccontiamo sempre poco. Siamo più affezionati al racconto delle vittime che al racconto di chi ce la fa. E siccome io quella guerra l'ho vista e ne ho vista la brutalità, ho visto cosa Daesh, l'ISIS, il gruppo Stato Islamico, chiamate come volete, ha fatto alla comunità irachena, ha fatto a Mosul, ma non solo la devastazione architettonica, come ha sventrato, distrutto il senso della convivenza delle comunità. Partirei proprio da lì con Nadia. Di nuovo grazie. Nadia, sei cresciuta in una comunità che è la comunità yazida nel distretto di Sinjar in Iraq. Ti chiederei di portare i nostri ascoltatori, le persone che sono qui a condividere la tua presenza lì, al tempo di pace. Com'è stata la tua infanzia?
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be part of this festival. And thank you for your question and what you just mentioned, that sometimes we focus on the lives of survivors during conflict, but we forget that, people and survivors like me, they had a life and family and a future and a community. And it is so important to remember that, because all of that was just, and it is still taken from them. My childhood was happy because I was with my family. We worked hard and struggled for a living, but we were together as a family, as a community. I was the youngest of 11 children, and my mom was a single mother. She raised 11 children on her own on a small farm in a remote village. And because of the poverty and because my mom was a single mother, I was the only one from my sibling was able to go to school inside the village. But, the conflict felt far away from our remote village. But at the same time, I was always aware that Yazidis were on the margins of Iraqi society. We didn't learn, I went to school for 11 years, I didn't learn about our language or culture in school. In the big cities in Iraq, our neighbors, unfortunately, would make rude comments about our practices and faith, and just because we were different. So, and as you mentioned, in 2014, ISIS invaded Sinjar, and that happy livelihood, that, happy small or big family was taken from me. My mother was killed. 6 of my brothers were killed. My entire, family, friends, neighbors, relatives were taken into sexual slavery. Children were taken into training camps, and men were killed all over Sinjar, and more than 5,000 people were killed, and more than 6,000 people, especially women and children, were taken into sexual slavery. They took advantage, ISIS took advantage of our marginalization to attack us. ISIS's plan to destroy our community because of our faith were very clear. And it is hard to imagine that kind of violence in reality. But they had not hidden their intentions of doing all these crimes against my community. What surprised me is that no one helped us inside Iraq, our own government, or the one that were supposed, the armies that were supposed to be protecting us, they felt, and we were left defenseless and were giving no warning to escape. But at the same time, the international community just left us, and more than 450,000 people in August of 2014, they were left alone. Some of them just fled to the mountain without food and water. Others were killed, and thousands were taken into captivity. And that was ISIS's plan for my community in 2014. They had plans for all other communities. ISIS committed crimes to other communities in Iraq, but their plan for Yazidis was so specific. The plan was to make sure that Yazidis will never be able to go back to Sinjar. Their plan was to eradicate our community from Iraq by taking women and children from the Yazidi community into sexual slavery.
Nadia, tu hai parlato molto della tua esperienza in quel periodo, hai molto raccontato e molto scritto, e questo non solo non è usuale, ma questo disegna il grande coraggio, che non è il grande coraggio della vittima che parla dei crimini che ha subito, ma della donna che chiede che questo non accada di nuovo. Hai detto in un'intervista nel 2016: mi sento vecchia, ho 21 anni, so di essere giovane, ma è come se nelle loro mani ogni parte di me fosse cambiata, ogni millimetro del mio corpo è diventato vecchio. Sono stata consumata da quello che mi hanno fatto, ne sono uscita totalmente diversa. Ti chiederei, se vuoi, di raccontare cosa è stata per te l'esperienza dello Stato islamico sul corpo delle donne della tua comunità.
I think, and as you just mentioned, I have wrote this all down in my book, The Last Girl, because it's not possible to say what ISIS did to the Yazidi women and girls in just 1 hour or one talk. What they did and what they are still doing to thousands of Yazidi women and girls who are still missing in captivity, including my sister-in-law, my niece, my friends and relatives who are still missing in Syria. These crimes are still ongoing against them. I think when ISIS attacked us, before they attacked us, and just because I was the youngest in the family, I feel like I was always the child of the family, even though I was 21 years old. And everything came so fast, and I lost so many people that I loved so fast within hours of when ISIS attacked us. And looking back now, 8 years later, I think I was forced on, being, to this change, to these big changes in my life. I was not looking for all of this. I was just in a small village with, 2,000 people. My dream was to open a beauty salon in the village, to help women and girls in the village to, came together in that beauty salon, to be the first one in the village to have a salon. It was difficult to, after what ISIS did this to us, it was difficult for me to just focus on myself, because I left so many women and girls behind in captivity, who they, I knew they were going through sexual violence every minute of being in captivity. And I just wanted to raise my voice. I wanted the world to do something to rescue the missing one, to help them, to bring them back to their families. I knew that they had no life in ISIS captivity, and ISIS themselves were so proud of what they did to the Yazidi women and girls. There are, if you check online, there are videos of ISIS buying and selling women 9 years old, girls 9 years old, 10 years old, who were still, children taken into captivity. And some of them have grown up in captivity, and we just left them behind. And it's been 8 years, and since we've been, advocating for a task force that we've been asking the United Nations, the Iraqi government, and other, the international community to create a task force and rescue the missing women and children who have been in captivity for 8 years. And sometimes we talk about ISIS as if something, if it is something in the past, but it is not for thousands of families. ISIS is not something in the past for the Yazidi community who are still desperate to, find peace, to rebuild, to go home, to get their loved ones from captivity being back, to exhume the mass graves and bury their loved ones. Like I have been waiting for 8 years to bury my brothers, my mother, and other families members. So for women, it was a genocide for the whole community, but for women, it's much more difficult, and they have been traumatized. They need support. They need immediate support. They need a safe place, and most importantly, we need to do something to rescue the missing one.
Nadia, si stima che siano stati rapiti tra i 6 e i 10.000 membri della comunità yazida, alcuni dei quali in cattività per anni, come ricordavi. Ancora da 2 a 300.000 yazidi restano nei campi profughi nel nord dell'Iraq, quindi sradicati dalle loro comunità, con l'impossibilità di ricostruire quella che è la base naturale della vita delle persone, il proprio domicilio, la partecipazione alla comunità. Sono sfollati. Essere sfollati significa non riuscire a rimettere una base, non riuscire ad avere un tetto, la consuetudine della vita quotidiana. Da dove si parte per ricostruire una comunità così ferita e così lacerata come la tua?
Well, the first thing is that you cannot rebuild a community in IDP camps. And I'm telling you this because I lived in one of the displaced camps with some of my family members, but with the whole community. And there was no privacy for women especially, and for survivors. There was no privacy. We were so vulnerable again in the camps, in tents with thousands of people. And my community has no future in the camps. They have been displaced inside their own country for 8 years. They are only 2 hours away from their homeland. And we cannot make, for them, the Yazidi people who are, the families are still in the camps, they cannot make a living, get a quality education or healthcare, or even have a basic privacy and infrastructure. So camps make day-to-day living unbearable for thousands of Yazidi families, but especially for women and girls, is just not a place to be, because most of them are survivors. We have thousands of single mothers who are now, their husbands were killed during the ISIS attack, and the mothers have children, and now they are in these camps without any job opportunities, and they just cannot take care of their children in these camps. They also make it difficult, the camps make it difficult to maintain our communal culture and relationships, as we have been and hearing that we talking about relationships. Is just not possible for the community to maintain that. But to rebuild the community, we have to holistically rebuild our lives. And the best place for that is our homeland. Now this initiative, that I founded in 2018, after I felt that, and I was seeing, that at the beginning, to be honest, my goal was to just advocate for survivors of sexual violence, for justice and accountability for my community and other communities. But then I realized that people in the camps were just, they were suffering, and they were so vulnerable. And other communities after Iraq, was liberated from ISIS, after other communities started to go back to their homelands and rebuild. But for the Yazidis, it was not the same. And once again, we were left by our government and the international community. Sinjar was liberated and has been liberated for over 5 years, but the government just neglected the rebuilding and helping the community to go back and rebuild their lives. So I realized that my community was just disappearing in these camps. The camps were destroying my community. So I started the initiative, and Nadia's initiative is working on the ground to restore infrastructure in Sinjar, to make return possible, and to serve those who are already rebuilding their lives. There are hundreds of survivors, single mothers that have already returned to Sinjar, and we are expanding basic services like livelihood support, education, healthcare, and interim reparations. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, ISIS plans for the Yazidi was, to kill all the men and took women and girls and children into captivity. But their goal was also to destroy the basic services, so that when Sinjar is liberated, Yazidis will not be able to go back without these basic services. So what they did, they destroyed all the farms. Like my family, Yazidi families have been depending on agriculture, so they had farms, and they also destroyed every school in Sinjar. They destroyed the only hospital we had in Sinjar. So what we have been doing and trying to do, and trying to convince other governments and NGOs to do, is to help the community to go back and have a dignified life and rebuild the basic services, so that the community can rebuild the rest and have a simple life again, and feel that they are part of the Iraqi society again.
Grazie per averci spiegato anche qual è l'impegno pratico della Nadia's Initiative. Lo dico a beneficio di chi ci ascolta, Nadia, che cosa significhi vivere in un campo per sfollati in Iraq. Vivere in un campo per sfollati in Iraq significa fronteggiare durante l'estate delle temperature che possono raggiungere o sfiorare i 50 gradi e che viceversa possono precipitare durante la stagione invernale. Vivere in un campo profughi, ha ragione Nadia quando dice che è la violenza secondaria dei conflitti, che non significa solo limitarsi a punire le comunità nel presente del conflitto, ma significa anche punire quelle comunità e lasciare loro delle conseguenze per il futuro. Distruggere le scuole significa destinare le generazioni che verranno all'ignoranza. Distruggere gli acquedotti significa mettere a repentaglio la salute. Distruggere gli ospedali significa privare il futuro del diritto ad essere curati. E questa condizione di sospensione è quella che vivono migliaia di persone ancora in Iraq, nei campi per sfollati, dove, lo sottolineo perché è stata una delle cose più difficili da raccontare del dopoguerra che non raccontiamo mai abbastanza, per molti anni le vittime dei miliziani dello Stato islamico hanno dovuto vivere negli stessi campi profughi con accanto, vicine nelle tende, le vedove e i figli dei miliziani dello Stato islamico, senza che, diciamo, il governo iracheno e in fondo anche la comunità internazionale si facesse davvero carico di questo trauma raddoppiato, che andava evidentemente gestito forse con più cautela. Vorrei chiederti, Nadia, se c'è stato un momento specifico in cui tu ti sei detta voglio espormi, voglio fare sì che la mia voce possa essere di ispirazione e coraggio per altri che hanno vissuto la mia stessa storia.
I think it was the moment that I realized that we were left alone and unprotected. It was the moment that we were surrounded by ISIS for 2 weeks, and I was just, watching my brothers, my mom, my village. Everyone was just praying and waiting for almost 2 weeks for the international community, for our government to help us, to not just let ISIS commit a genocide against us. And it was that moment when nobody came, and we were just taken. More than 2,000 people were taken into a school, and they were separated. Men were, massacred. Old women were killed, like my mom, because they were old for them and for what they wanted. Young boys were taken into training camps and to be, to brainwash them. So it was that moment that I realized that, I need to do something, to say something, but I just couldn't do it. And I had, no voice being surrounded by ISIS. But after I escaped ISIS, I couldn't help to bring everyone from captivity with me. But when I felt free, I knew that at least I could make the world to hear their voices, their names, their stories, and I could, tell my story and the story of others. And I think it was because I didn't want anyone to tell my story on behalf of me, because nobody was there and when I was going through all of it. And I saw that others were doing, and trying to tell our stories or on behalf of us. So I decided that it was my story, it was my body, it was my family, my community, my village, and the world, they failed to protect us, but now it's their responsibility to listen and to do something. And I'm glad I did that, because I think every survivor should have the opportunity to tell her story. And I do this work on behalf of, so many so many women and girls who are still in captivity, but not on behalf of those who are free in Iraq or in Ukraine or in Africa, because those they have an important voice and we should listen to it. And when they want to speak, we should be there and listen to them. But if they don't want to speak, we should not push them to, tell their stories again and again. So I think it was that moment that I just wanted to tell my story and not let anyone to say it on behalf of me.
Io su questa frase, che è estremamente importante, chiederei davvero un applauso per te. Perché è anche un pezzo della nostra presunzione di narratori, Nadia, di narratori occidentali, l'idea di farci carico o di parlare attraverso le nostre parole per il trauma degli altri e delle altre. Quello che è successo alla comunità yazida è una tragedia scritta tutta sul corpo delle donne, scritta principalmente sul corpo delle donne che ne portano la memoria, e essere sopravvissuti come è sopravvissuta Nadia significa avere il sollievo della vita e contemporaneamente il fardello della testimonianza. Il fardello della testimonianza significa essere condannati a una condanna nuova, e cioè quella di non poter smettere di raccontare, di dire, di rendere gli altri coscienti di quello che è stato, affinché non accada di nuovo, e quindi rievocare costantemente il trauma di cui Nadia generosamente una volta ancora ci sta parlando. In questo tuo impegno lungo anni, vorrei chiederti, Nadia, tu la speranza dov'è che la trovi la mattina quando ti svegli?
I think sometimes it is hard to maintain hope, but we are humans, and I think hope is what drives us and what drives me every morning to do more and more for others. I think what gives me hope is that, you know, what I'm doing right now for survivors, in not just for Yazidi survivors, but for survivors in many different places that we are working with them. What we are doing for them and providing for them, I just think about it and think about when I was in the camp and in captivity, and I just wish that someone could have done that for me and for my family. So I know how important this work is for so many women and girls who are still not able to share their stories. I think it is them that pushing me every morning to say, you know, to tell my story over and over again, because it's not easy to tell your story. It's not easy to tell a story of sexual violence everywhere, you know, but especially when you come from a place where I come from. Sexual violence comes with a lot of shame and stigma, and I know that so many survivors have just chosen to not speak, to not share their stories, because they feel that, you know, protecting perpetrators, it's not a solution, but sometimes that protects them from the shame and stigma that comes with speaking up about sexual violence. And I think sexual violence in the past was seen as a side effect of the war, but today, because we have been sharing our stories despite the shame and stigma, today we see that the world cannot, you know, see sexual violence as a side effect of war anymore. They see it as a weapon of war to destroy communities. And as we have seen, thousands of stories of sexual violence have already came from, you know, from Ukraine, and now we are seeing that the media and the world is talking about it, and I'm glad that, you know, that they don't ignore that, their stories and what is happening to them, because we know that sexual violence is as old as war itself, and when war happens, sexual violence will definitely happen. And that is why I'm doing this, because I know that if we don't do it, if we just take one day off without telling and reminding the world leaders that this is happening right now in Ukraine, in Iraq, in DRC, in Myanmar, in other places. If we take one day off, they will think that it is over. And other groups like ISIS will continue committing the same crimes against others in other parts of the world. So we should not, I think we should not give ISIS or anyone like them a chance of impunity. Impunity should not be an option here. And without telling our stories, we are protecting them. I know it's hard to tell our stories, but I believe that we should help survivors to support them, to feel safe and secure so that they can share their stories because they want their stories to be heard.
La tua generazione, Nadia, ha spesso mi è capitato di parlare con giovani 25enni, 30enni nei viaggi in Iraq, nei mesi in cui ho lavorato lì, e quello che mi colpiva è che i trentenni, i ventenni misurano la loro vita sulla base dei conflitti che hanno vissuto. Ricordo nello specifico una persona, un ragazzo di Mosul che mi disse questa frase, mi disse: il vostro, inteso come voi occidentali, più grande errore non è stato il 2003, l'anno dell'invasione statunitense, è stato il 2011, quando ve ne siete andati pensando che la situazione fosse risolta, tranquilla, e ci avete lasciato senza un progetto, senza un aiuto, senza un sostegno. Quali sono stati secondo te gli errori più gravi dell'Occidente, che ha delle responsabilità pesanti, oggettive sul destino dell'Iraq, e cosa può fare oggi l'Occidente per riscattare quegli errori?
I think that is a big question. And I think one of the biggest mistakes is thinking reactively rather than proactively about conflict. The West has invaded countries like Iraq, not considering the power vacuums they leave behind, or like that, boys told you how groups like ISIS will take advantage of the situation to harm minority groups or minority women and girls. So world leaders also rarely take the impact of war on women and girls seriously. Sexual violence is considered as an unfortunate side effect. In reality, as I said, it's a weapon of warfare. The international community needs to think more about how to develop and invest in communities to stabilize them before war breaks out, and to work to prevent mass atrocities and gender-based violence when conflict does occur. I think the final piece is accountability. The international community cannot act surprised when genocide and sexual violence are repeated if they did nothing to hold perpetrators accountable and show that human rights have value. But I also think, and when I listen to, Western, countries and people, there is this, idea of one solution can fix, all the problems in different countries in the Middle East. I think that is not possible in every situation, because what is needed for women and girls in Afghanistan and what is happening to them, it's really different from what is happening to Yazidi women and girls right now in Iraq. And it is different for women and girls in Syria, and a different story in Yemen and other places. So it is really important to understand the root causes and to understand how different solutions works for different groups and different countries. And just because something worked in Iraq, that doesn't mean that that solution will work perfectly in Afghanistan or another country in conflict regions.
La difficoltà di trovare i responsabili è anche quello che ti ha spinto a ideare quello che è presentato oggi come il codice Murad, che è una sorta di codice di condotta per avvicinare le vittime di crimini sessuali, le vittime di torture di questa natura, per riuscire ad avere le informazioni, le prove di cui ha bisogno la giustizia, senza però turbare ulteriormente un corpo e una psiche che sono già attraversati dal trauma. Ci puoi spiegare, Nadia, cos'è e qual è lo scopo di questo codice Murad? E anche perché...
Yes,
Scusami, e anche perché è così difficile ancora punire e ottenere giustizia per le vittime di violenze sessuali in guerra soprattutto.
Yes. So I worked with the UK government and with thousands of survivors from around the world. And we developed the Murad Code. So the Murad Code provides guidelines for engaging with survivors of sexual violence in a way that is respectful and trauma-informed. Some of the key recommendations from the code are protecting privacy, coordinating documentation to ensure that survivors don't have to retell their stories over and over again. Also being transparent about how information will be used, and ensuring access to healthcare and emergency support. And this what is so special about the code is that it was developed with survivors, with their opinions, with what they have felt about sharing their stories over and over again in the past. So it is really an important and code, and I hope that documenters, journalists, and investigators will use this code to guide them while working and engaging with survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. So to the second part of your question about justice, I think this is one of the biggest challenges we are facing right now. Countries have been extremely slow to prosecute ISIS members, and when they do, it is often for terrorism, not sexual violence or genocide, which are crimes against humanity. And I mean, let's take in the phrase for a moment: crimes against humanity. They are an affront to all of our human rights. And if there are crimes against all of us, why are we all not acting to make sure that there is justice, so that it is not done again in the future. It is also crucial to center survivors in our justice efforts. Survivors deserve to be included in efforts to hold their perpetrators accountable, and survivors also deserve support. True justice is not just punishing the crime, but attempting to righting the wrong. Although we can never undo the violence survivors have endured, we can support them with the resources and opportunities to heal and move forward with their lives. As you may know, we have, thousands of documents. We have thousands of testimonies, evidence. You have ISIS themselves published everything. And it's been 8 years, and so far, only 2 ISIS members have been held accountable in Germany. So it is really important that we look at what Germany has done in the past 8 years for other countries to look at it and do the same. But also in Iraq, we know that they have charged some ISIS members, but only with terrorism, not sexual violence or genocide. And the court and trials in Iraq, they don't include survivors. So there's no transparency how they are doing all the trial and the process. So that's why survivors are asking for an international court, because they don't trust the trials in Iraq, and they want an international court. They want their day in court, and I think we should help that. We should make sure that survivors have their day in court, and they deserve that. And we should not, as I mentioned before, impunity should not be an option. ISIS was not just 1 or 2 people. There were thousands of people who came from all over the world and joined ISIS and commit such crimes against minorities. So we must not give up on justice, because without justice there will not be a healing for my community, but especially for survivors.
È molto vero quello che dice Nadia, anche rispetto al modo in cui i paesi occidentali hanno gestito quello che è avvenuto dopo l'ISIS, quando dopo la dichiarata missione compiuta molti dei governi occidentali, la quasi totalità, diciamocelo pure, ha deciso di non curarsi delle donne, dei bambini che sono bambini apolidi, quindi senza documenti, ma soprattutto che non ha preso la responsabilità della giustizia verso tutta quell'esercito di foreign fighters partiti a migliaia per unirsi alle fila dello Stato islamico. Ci sono ancora migliaia di donne e bambini nei campi profughi nel nord della Siria e nel nord dell'Iraq. Naturalmente gli anni passano e i bambini crescono in questi campi profughi, bambini che erano piccoli nel mezzo della loro infanzia, quando è finita la guerra di liberazione di quei territori da Daesh, e che stanno diventando adolescenti in luoghi che sono luoghi di elezione per il fanatismo. Ma questo è un altro problema, ma che si collega a quello che dice Nadia rispetto al fatto che l'Occidente ha spesso utilizzato come alibi l'idea che sarebbe stato impossibile, quasi impossibile, trovare delle prove per i foreign fighter partiti ad unirsi alle fila dello Stato islamico per i crimini da loro commessi, come se caduto lo Stato islamico tutte le persone, tutti gli uomini soprattutto, che erano stati catturati e imprigionati, su quasi nessuno di loro si trovassero davvero delle testimonianze o delle prove in grado di far pagare loro i crimini che avevano commesso. Torno a un'altra delle frasi che ha scritto Nadia Murad. Ha scritto: la mia materia preferita da bambina era la storia, avevo una grande memoria, ora la mia memoria non è più la stessa. Nel mio cervello è tutto molto confuso. Ecco Nadia, noi siamo alla serata conclusiva di questo festival, che appunto conclude il Festival del Buon Vivere. È il 13° anno ed è un tema, il tema al centro di questi incontri è l'economia delle relazioni. Se ti chiedessi cos'è per te il buon vivere, cosa diresti?
Well, I think coming from a background of conflict and extreme poverty, I mainly think about the most basic human rights, which is, safety and security, access to quality education, healthcare, clean water, political representation, and the right to practice your religion and culture in peace. All of this goes into building sustainable and equitable lives. So good living for me, it was always, and back then and now, was always to just live a life free of fears of being different. And for 21 years I lived in that small village. I don't think we had one day of just being, living good without fears of being different. And that is why I've always dreamed and looked and wished a life of, just having basic human rights, feel free and safe and protected.
Io ti voglio ringraziare davvero tanto, Nadia, per il regalo che ci hai fatto a condividere una volta ancora con noi la tua esperienza, la tua storia. E ti vorrei chiedere, se vuoi, da ultimo, se c'è stato e qual è stato il momento più difficile in questi anni e invece il momento che ti ha dato maggiore forza, maggiore tenacia, che ti ha fatto pensare una volta ancora che la battaglia che stai facendo di nuovo sul tuo corpo è l'unica scelta possibile per una sopravvissuta.
You said this year?
In questi anni, sì.
I think the most difficult things, and it is still there, is being a woman. It's not, and doing work like this and sharing a story of sexual violence in the past 7 years has not been easy at all. It's always the same, and I had to find my way as a survivor to be able to work in a country that didn't protect me, and in a country that I almost lost my entire family. But I was able to to make sure that, that my voice, my story will be heard. And it is still challenging. We are still doing our best, traveling, talking to people like you, and sharing the story of my people, of women and girls. But I think one of the other biggest things is that just knowing that what happened to me in less than a decade is repeating itself in Ukraine right now. It was not an easy thing. The good thing, and one of the many good things, is that we are now rebuilding a little bit, piece by piece. People are thriving. I've been doing so many projects, but I think just seeing Germany being the first to hold in 2 ISIS members accountable in the past 8 years, and one of them this year, it gives me hope to just fight every day. But there are so many things that I'm grateful for that have happened in the past years. People like you, like the audience, who have given hours of their times to listen to the stories, to not just turn their backs from a story of a girl or community in a remote area in Iraq. All these things are really so important and meaningful to me, and just being with you tonight, this is one of the good things.
Hai citato l'Ucraina, Nadia. Io vorrei arrivare alla conclusione di questo nostro incontro proprio portando te e le persone che sono qui in sala con noi alla stretta attualità. È notizia proprio di pochi giorni fa che il Consiglio dei diritti umani delle Nazioni Unite ha dichiarato che che hanno raccolto in questi mesi gli osservatori prove incontrovertibili dei crimini di guerra perpetrati dai russi in Ucraina, dall'esercito russo in Ucraina, ma soprattutto casi di violenza, di abusi, di torture, di violenze sessuali talvolta subiti dalle donne di fronte ai loro familiari, di fronte ai loro figli, di fronte alle loro figlie. Ecco, uno dei danni psicologici naturalmente, ma al corpo, alla comunità, all'idea di persona che vive all'interno di una società che la violenza sessuale provoca, è quella di isolare, di rendere la persona, la vittima, il corpo della vittima una persona destinata alla solitudine per la memoria del trauma che ha subito, per la paura dello stigma, per la vergogna che teme di ricevere sulle spalle se denuncia e se chiede giustizia. Ecco, io ti chiederei cosa significa per te, cosa ha significato per te la parola solitudine e cosa significa oggi e per il futuro per te la parola giustizia.
I think loneliness and means, different things for different survivors, because every survivor has different experiences. And for me, I think I didn't let that loneliness to take control of me. I knew that the worst happened with ISIS, so shame and stigma were already, there when this happened to us. So I knew that, letting the loneliness and the shame and stigma with it to take control of me will never let the world to know about what ISIS did. So for justice, I think justice means different things. It's not about holding perpetrators accountable alone. It's about, providing reparations to survivors, safety, psychological support, all it means different things. Justice is not just about one thing. And for survivors, what we are doing right now with them, for example, some of them they felt lonely in the Yazidi community because they didn't want to share their stories of what happened to them. But unfortunately, in some cases, they were not getting the support they needed. And this is so sad that some of them, and I personally went through that. Sometimes we had to share our stories in order to access aid or qualify for asylum for another country. And I don't think any survivor should go through that. If they don't want to share their stories, we should still respect them and provide reparations and respect them. So justice means so many different things. It means, healing, but it can bring healing with different things, and we cannot, separate reparations, safety, and a dignified living from justice for survivors.
Grazie ancora per queste parole, Nadia. Io ti lascio prendere l'applauso.
Thank you so much. I can't hear it, but I feel it.
Nadia Murad stasera non ci ha solo raccontato la storia della sua vita e la storia della vita della sua comunità e delle loro distruzioni. Ci ha raccontato che il coraggio della testimonianza, il coraggio dei sopravvissuti è un mattone per ricostruire una comunità, per far sentire tutte le persone che si vergognano di quello che hanno subito non più sole, non più atomi, non più isole. E questo indipendentemente dal fatto che abbiano voglia di parlare o di denunciare. E ci ha ricordato che per una persona che ha come lei il coraggio di dire, di dirsi, di raccontare e di esporre il dolore del suo corpo, ce ne sono 10, 20, 100 che hanno il diritto di essere rispettate nel loro silenzio e tuttavia di avere giustizia. Questo credo sia alla base del suo impegno, alla base del codice Murad, a cui auguriamo tutta la fortuna e i risultati. Ti ringrazio a nome di tutte le persone che sono qui, Nadia, per la tua forza, per il tuo volto, per la serenità e la pacatezza con cui ci hai raccontato la tua storia, perché è questo che fanno le donne coraggiose, mantengono questo sorriso di nuovo gentile, perché è lo strumento migliore, più importante e più feroce che puoi usare per avere giustizia. Grazie.
Thank you so much for having me.
Grazie a tutti, grazie al Festival del Buon Vivere per avermi dato davvero una possibilità grande e bella come quella di parlare con Nadia Murad. Spero che le sue parole abbiano toccato ognuno di voi esattamente come hanno fatto una volta ancora con me. Grazie dell'invito, di avermi dato la possibilità di chiudere questo festival meraviglioso e buonanotte. Grazie.